Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. In 1947, the novel that won the Pulitzer for fiction was this, All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. This is not to be confused with All the President's Men, which was published about 30 some odd years later. That was a nonfiction work written by Woodward and Bernstein, which described the downfall of Richard Nixon. This is a work of fiction, although it is a political book that does investigate or tells a story of American political corruption. I should say political corruption Southern style. But this is a novel. All the President's Men was nonfiction. But this is a novel, and it won the Pulitzer in 1947. And it's something of a cross between Faulkner's brooding South and Fitzgerald's privileged elite. Both those aspects of the American character show up in this novel. The author, Robert Penn Warren, he'd written 2 novels before this one and a number of novels after it. He'd also written a lot of, there was a short story collection, some nonfiction work, and about 20 books of poetry. But this is what he's best remembered for and will always be remembered for. It's a very good novel. It's worthy of the Pulitzer. It's an American classic, to be sure. It's a very American novel. It's rough and tumble, it's angry and sentimental, it's crass and poetic, all at the same time. Very much captures the American spirit or the American character, particularly about mid-20th century. It is a product of its time. I don't know if a book like this would win a Pulitzer today for 2 reasons. One of them I'll talk about later on. But the other reason is that at times it's overly sentimental, almost mawkish, not cliched, but soap opera-ish. Let's just say that. And I'm not sure that kind of thing washes well with the American reader today. But in its time, it was incredibly popular. It was made into a movie twice. The first version of it, I think it came out in the 1950s. It won an Academy Award, Best Picture of the Year. Many of the actors in it won Academy Awards as well. And what's interesting in this book, the way it's written, it's very descriptive, it's very cinematic, even down to the way Warren describes the reaction various characters will have to events. Even the tics, their facial tics, or their hand gestures, almost like stage direction. Although I'm fairly certain Warren did not write this with the intention of it being used for a movie. But it does have that cinematic quality to it. It's also a long novel, and at times it struck me as being, overwritten. And Warren, as I said, was a poet. There are some descriptions in here that are really, it's pure poetry, but it goes on a little too long. I think a good editor could have gone through this and, probably removed about 100 pages or so, and it still would have been a great novel and still would have won a Pulitzer. In fact, I kind of think that's what happened. If you look closely at the cover here, this is the restored edition. This edition came out, I think, in 2000. Let me just double check my notes here. Bear with me. I apologize for this. I should have been better prepared. This edition, the restored edition, was published in 2001. Yes, that seems correct. In 2001. And when they say the restored edition, this is not the version of the novel that won the Pulitzer. That version of the novel had been edited down in size by the editor and by Warren himself. They made lots of changes. They took out a lot of sections of the book. All of that had been restored into this version. Well, this version is one. I never read the original version. This version is great. I strongly recommend it. It's a great novel. It moves along in a galloping pace. It's intriguing. It's very interesting. It's very entertaining. But I think it would be kind of interesting to look at the unrestored version, to read the version that the people who read it when it was first published back in the 40s and 50s, what they were reading. It's the same story, but told in a slightly different way. So I think that's kind of interesting. At any rate, I'd always heard of this novel, and I was aware of the movie. I never saw the movie. And it was one of those novels I always wanted to read, and it's been on my TBR list for a very long time. But it's one of those novels that would occasionally start rising to the top of the list, and then it would sink down to the bottom again, and then rise to the top, and then sink down. Never got around to it. But I knew what the story was about, or at least I thought I did. I knew it was about American political corruption. And I thought, we live in a very politicized time. There's a lot of political corruption now, maybe more than has been quite some time. So I thought maybe this is a good time to read this novel. But as I said, I knew about it, and I had always thought that it was a fictionalized account of the political career of Huey P. Long. Now, Huey P. Long was an American politician through the 1920s and about the first half of the 1930s. He was the governor of Louisiana. He was absurdly corrupt, brazenly corrupt. He was a very colorful character, a loudmouth, a braggart, a demagogue. He promised the people of Louisiana all kinds of things, and he often delivered on those things, better highways and better schools and better hospitals. But in order to achieve those promises, he used a lot of bribery and threats and bullying to make good on his promises. But his intentions seemed to be good. But a very colorful character. And I thought this novel was based on him, on his political career. But it really isn't. The central character of the novel, though, is definitely based on Huey P. Long. He's the governor of the state. His name is Willie Talos, the governor of the state, but the state is never identified, okay? And so Willie Talos is often referred to as the boss. He's very much like a Huey P. Long character, complete with a circle of goons and thugs to carry out his every whim. An interesting little side note here. The original iteration of this novel, the governor, the boss, the central character, was named Willie Stark. And in the movie, he's called Willie Stark. Okay? In the original version of the novel, before it was published, before it was edited, and before things were changed around, the character's name was Willie Talos. Warren's editor and Warren himself decided to change the character's name to Willie Stark before the book was published. It seemed like the name would be a little easier to grasp, easier to pronounce. Talos is kind of an odd name, especially for a Southern caricature. In this restored version, they put the name back to the original name that Warren had for the character, Willie Talos. I thought that was very interesting. It's a very interesting name because it calls to mind a character from Greek mythology, Talos, who was this kind of monster protector of the island of Crete, who would drive off pirates and invaders from the island. And I think what Warren was doing here, when he chose that name for the governor of the state, this southern state, was this character was to represent someone who is keeping modernity at bay. Don't let that northern influence creep into our beautiful southern state or to hurt the old southern ways down here. I think that's what his intention was in choosing that name. But I think that would have been lost on an audience then and in an audience now. So the name was changed to Stark. It's a stronger name. It's a little easier it just conjures up a very different image. At any rate, I've got off the subject here. I originally thought that that would be the main character. The boss, Governor Talos, Governor Willie Stark, whatever you want to call him, he's the central character in this. Everything kind of revolves around him, but he's like the center of a wheel. But he's not the main character. The main character is the narrator of the story, a journalist named Jack Burden is his name, a cynical journalist, kind of tough guy. He doesn't believe much in anything. He's kind of darkly cynical and very sarcastic in his tone. And so he's the main character. And he becomes fascinated in Willie Talos before Willie Talos was the governor. When Willie Talos was just kind of a local, corrupt typical Southern politician, Jack Burden, the journalist, got interested in this guy and began to follow his career until this man becomes the governor of the state. But in the process, Jack Burden goes from being the journalist to being part of the inner circle, and he becomes as corrupt as the governor, as the boss. In fact, in some ways, what this book is about is how that kind of corruption impacts everybody who gets close to it. Everyone gets touched by this and corrupted in some way, in some ways very, very tragically. But it was just interesting, Willie Stark, Willie Talos, he's the central character, but not the main character. It's the guy telling the story and how he reveals himself, and you see the changes he goes throughout the novel. As I said, it's very well written. It deserves the Pulitzer for sure. Some of the writing style, maybe not so much to today's audience, but it's not that bad. I mean, it's not that mawkish. And there are parts of this where the writing actually soars. It becomes absolutely beautiful. In fact, one of the high points of the novel is chapter 6, which I think could be torn out of this and published as a separate novel in its own right. And I don't want to give anything away. There's a lot of twists and turns in the plot here. But chapter 6, deals with a summer romance of two young people and how that summer romance comes to an end. And it is honest, it's clear-eyed, it's heartbreaking, but it's very true. It avoids the sentimentality you find in other parts of this novel. If any of you have ever experienced that summer romance when you were younger, I know I did, you'll completely recognize yourself in the characters in that one chapter. It's just a beautiful standout chapter. And I had to wonder if maybe the Pulitzer Committee gave this book its prize in that year just because of that chapter. It's so wonderful. But then you dive right back into the story of political corruption and how people become corrupted, and the cynicism of Jack Burton, and the corruption and the larger-than-life character of Willie Stark, Willie Talos, and everything else. So it's a good novel. It's a very good novel, and I recommend it, although with one caveat. And as a matter of fact, earlier when I said that there are 2 reasons why this novel might not make the grade today, one of them, the lesser reason, is maybe the writing isn't kind of more old-fashioned style. The other reason, though, has something to do with the racist epithets that are sprinkled throughout this book. Now, the story is placed in the Deep South, all right? And it takes place, although the book was written in the 1940s, the story takes place back in the 1920s. And these racist tropes were very, very common at the time, always directed against people of color. And the book, it's very true to the way people spoke back then. In fact, probably pretty true to the way some people in the South still speak today. But it's very true in that regard. And I think, there's a lot of sensitivity to that kind of thing today, and I think some people might have some problems with that. To be honest with you, there were moments when I was reading this, and the book isn't shot through with that stuff, but it does occur from time to time. And there were moments when I was reading this, I was wondering, is that the character talking, or is that Warren talking? I did a little research into Robert Penn Warren, and his career as a writer and an academic, and he was a member of the Southern Agrarian Movement in the 1930s. This was a literary, intellectual, kind of a literary club of individuals who kind of romanticized the Old South, the antebellum South, and wanted to protect the South from invasion from the northern ideas. They wanted to hearken back to the good old days. It was kind of strange. Intimated in that is some sense of racist ideas. However, at some point, Robert Penn Warren disavowed all of that, and he became a great spokesperson for the civil rights movement. He interviewed Dr. King, and Malcolm X, and many other leaders of all of that. So he did have this great change in his attitude. I don't know if this book was written before or after that change. Nonetheless, it's there. Some of that stuff is in this book. Whether it was reflective of Warren's personal attitudes, I don't know. It was certainly honest regarding the attitudes of many of the characters in this book. It is kind of interesting. There are people of color in this book, but none of them are main characters. They're always in the background. They're always, either working in the fields or working in the house, or they're like servants and this kind of thing. The few times people of color have any dialogue in this book, they're speaking with that Jim Crow accent, which is really quite offensive. Now, that's a small portion of this book. The book is about corruption in American politics in the South. That's what it's about. And I'm mentioning this other thing because, if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, completely understandable. If, it may not be the book for you. If you can get past that and understand that this book is a product of its time, and understand that these attitudes were prevalent at the time and shaped the thinking of the time. It's kind of like reading a Mark Twain novel. These things creep in. Or think of the character of Jim in Huckleberry Finn and think of his full name. It can make that novel troublesome, but it doesn't deny that novel its greatness as a great expression of American literature in the 19th century. This is a novel, a great expression of American literature in the mid-20th century and of American political and social ideals. So I'm throwing out that one caveat. I hope you can maybe get past it. It shouldn't prevent you from reading this and from enjoying it or finding great value in this. It is an American novel, no doubt about it. It's very well written for the most part. There are some surprising plot twists along the way that'll keep you interested. And that's about it for All the King's Men. I recommend it advisedly. That's all I've got for you today. Keep reading and take care of yourselves.